So you bit the bullet and you got an Irish flute. Now you got to take care of it. And that's what we're going to talk about in this one, so stick around. Picture this. I'm 17 years old, and after a bit of searching around the Wild West that was the internet in like 1996, I came upon almond oil as the preferred option for how to take care of a wooden flute. Where does one find almond oil in 1996 before the advent of Amazon and things like that? Well, I ended up going to a store called Bath & Body Works in a mall. I don't know how it works these days, since I don't really go to malls that often, but at the time, it was managed by a girl who was probably about 17 years old herself. Side note, I'm pretty terrible at judging when girls are interested in me. My default setting is she's not interested, and I can probably count on one hand the number of times when I thought, hey, maybe this girl might be into me. Well, this happened to be one of those times. She was super friendly and chatty, but eventually we had to get around to the reason why I'm in the store in the first place. And I said, I'm looking for some almond oil. No problem, she says, and she leads me over to the plethora of available options. And as I'm standing there looking at them, she goes, you know, almond oil is really good for massages. Is that what you're using it for? And of course I said, no, I'm using it to oil my flute. No, see, I've got a wooden flute and I need, you know what? Here, just take my money and let me get the hell out of here. So the moral of this story is twofold. One, don't say that. And number two, don't use almond oil in the first place. Instead, use boar oil. It's made for wooden flutes and it works great. So now that we've got that sorted, let's dive in. In case you didn't watch my tin whistle maintenance video, the abridged version of that is don't clean your whistle. Unfortunately, flute maintenance is not quite so simple. Now before we go any further, if you just bought a new flute and it came with care and feeding instructions from the maker, follow those. A lot of times makers will base those instructions on their experience with their flutes and with various types of maintenance and cleaning and oiling procedures. So I don't think what I'm going to share with you here is going to differ too much from that, but on the off chance it does, follow what your manufacturer says to do. Flutes can break down in a variety of ways, from 2 pieces up to 5 or 6, depending on how the flute was made. The main thing to keep in mind, the main thing to remember, is that as you're assembling it, you don't just push them together, you want to twist as you connect the sections. Now, if you've got a section that doesn't fit, that's too loose, you've got a couple of options. You can either use Teflon tape or silk thread to effectively make these sections a little bit bigger, wrapping that around. Now, here's where it becomes important to read the manual. Some flute makers are vehemently opposed to using silk thread, to the point where if you use it, you'll void the warranty. So definitely check that out first and keep that in mind. If you've got a section that's too loose, hopefully you've already applied silk thread or Teflon tape to it, in which case, take some off. If not, and if it's just bare cork on the section here, it's usually because you've just gotten around to playing it and the cork has swelled up naturally. Your best bet there, just leave it in the case, let it air dry on its own. When you're done playing, the first thing you want to do is disassemble the flute. And just like when you're putting it together, you want to make sure you gently twist as you pull the sections apart. With enough moisture, these joints can swell and stick, and so just yanking them out like that can cause these smaller sections, the smaller tendons, to crack, and you definitely don't want that. Now once you've got the flute disassembled, grab your cleaning rod and your cleaning cloth. I use a chunk of old t-shirt material. Works for me, but really any sort of non-linty type cloth would probably do the job just fine. And I make it so that it's got a little bit of a narrow part and you thread it through this little hole in the stick. This cleaning rod's bamboo. They're usually plastic or wood or bamboo or something like that. This one is metal, which isn't great. It came with one of my other flutes, and I say it's not great because the metal could technically jam inside of the bore of the flute. I don't know, just be a little more careful if you're using a metal cleaning rod, I suppose. Anyway, you wrap the cloth around here so that it'll fit through the bore, but snugly. You want to start with the smallest section, and you get that cloth in there pretty good and all the little corners. Why do you start with the smallest section? Well, because it's going to have the least amount of moisture, and otherwise you'd just be transferring it to the other parts of the flute. If you really want to be diligent, You can take the end cap and the cork out of the head joint and really get this in here. Personally, I only do that about every 3 or 4 times, just because I'm lazy, and I just try to work the cloth in there and not really worry about it too much. Once you're done, put all the sections back in the case, and you're good to go until next time. Resist the urge to say, if I leave this all connected, I'll play it more. That may very well be true, but you'll also be shortening the life of the flute, and if you're disciplined enough to want to practice all that time, apply that discipline to cleaning it, taking care of it, and it'll probably last you the rest of your life. Before we get into the how, let's talk how often. As in, how often do you need to oil your flute? Terry McGee, who made one of my flutes, told me once a week for the first month, once a month for the first year, and then once a year for the rest of its life. And that's the phase that I'm in now, so once a year. Your mileage may vary. Once we've got all that separated out here, I take another piece of cloth. This one's much smaller, because you don't really need a whole lot. And I take a Ziploc bag, and I chuck this piece of cloth in the bag, and then I take my bore oil, and I give it a good soak. There's not really a science to this, just kind of blast it, and I keep it in the bag because this oil gets everywhere and you don't really want it on your skin that much if you can help it. So it keeps it nice and ready to go whenever I need it. When that's all soaked, same drill as cleaning. Thread this onto your cleaning rod, just like so, and one section at a time, I'm gonna run that through. I like to point it at a light source, just so I can make sure it's nice and even. You don't want it pooling up, you know, nice, just a nice even coat. And then you hit the outside with the rag. Again, not dripping, just nice and even. And then you put it in the case. Now when you're oiling the head joint, you definitely do want to pull the cork out, because you're going to need to get oil all the way through. What if you have a keyed flute? Anything different? Yes, you have to be aware of the oil on the pads, as the oil can dry the pads out and make them crack. So if you're more mechanically inclined and more adventurous than I am, you could actually just take all the keys off. Me, I know I'd never get them back on again, so what I do is use saran wrap. This way, to keep oil off the pads without having to worry about taking them all apart. You can just slide that underneath, and then you can oil it just like you would any other flute. Once all the sections are oiled, I'll usually let it rest for about 2 hours or so, and then I'll hold it up to the light again, just to make sure that there isn't any oil pooling in the bottom. If there is, no problem, you can just take a small dry rag, run it through, just kind of even things out again. And that is really all of the flute maintenance that I will do. I don't mess with keys, as evidenced by the fact that this one is held on by a rubber band. Really do need to get that fixed one of these days. Unlike the tin whistle, which you can pretty much just chuck in a bag and it'll probably be okay, the flute does take a little bit of care. I hope this video is useful to you guys, puts you on the right track as far as taking care of these if you got a brand new one. Let me know what you think. If you guys have other techniques and maintenance stuff that you like to do, share it with the class. I'd be curious to see what everybody else does. Otherwise, I'll see y'all in the next one. Cheers.